It's been put on its side,
Oh my God!
beaten on, built up, driven some of the toughest tracks in the country,
Whoa! Holy heck!
and toured in some of the most amazing spots you can take a four-wheel drive. But after 3 hard years, the old girl is looking a bit tired. She's battered and bruised, and there aren't too many straight panels left. There's dents in both front guards, rust in the bottom of both A-pillars, none of the doors are straight, and the tub is pretty fed.
So now it's finally time to give the mighty pony some well overdue tender loving care. We've got a heap planned to get her back to her former glory, but first things first, she's in the shed behind me down here at the Day Spa in South Australia. I'm with some good mates from Raptor, and we're going to fix the dents, fix the rust, do a bit of panel beating, and along the way we're going to show you a whole bunch of tips and tricks that you need if you want to give a project like this a go yourself. So let's hook in and fix the mighty pony.
The pony cost us about $3,000 when we bought it, which some people didn't believe. But the reason it was so cheap was because it previously had a life as a beach rig, and the amount of rust in it was desperately needing to be fixed. You can see the boys have been hard at work and have already done a lot of the rust repair. But we've taken the doors off and gotten a nice little surprise.
So you can see here that more rust has been uncovered, and that's a really important thing to consider if you do decide to do some rust repair yourself. A lot of the time there's rust you can see, but once you start stripping the vehicle, it's only then that you'll find more. And you can see here this gutter, there's even bits of bark and stuff in there, so it's all gotten all moist and sat in there over time and rusted out the gutters, but hopefully we don't find too much more. But it's important to keep in mind, be prepared to find more rust than you think you can see.
Next up, we've stripped all the bar work off, and even though it's in good nick, while it's off we'll give it a bit of a touch up too. I also had a bit of a search for second-hand parts and was able to find a new door and some new guards.
Obviously, some of the doors we're doing some panel beating on, putting some body filler in them, and some panels we're just replacing completely. You might be wondering, well, how can you tell which one is which? Well, in often cases, on a lot of the doors and stuff, we can fix them. There's one door that we're not fixing, the front passenger side one we're just going to replace, but the other doors weren't too bad, so we were able to pull the dents out and bog them up. But for example, here's one of the old guards, and you can see here, probably be a bit of a waste of time trying to straighten that out, considering new guards are pretty cheap. These are a combination. I managed to get some replacement guards. That one's an original guard, it's a bit festy, but we'll tidy it up. And then that one's just an aftermarket one, plus a couple of new doors. I think I spent around $400 on second-hand parts. So I guess it just comes down to how much time you want to spend in it really. But for the guards, for example, you're probably better off just replacing them. But if you want to give panel beating a go on some of the larger areas, one that's got a bit more of a flat surface, like a door that's got a bit of a dent in it, you're better off doing that than even attempting to try and fix something like that.
The ones we're not replacing are getting a few love taps with some dollies to straighten them out, and we're also going to be cutting out the bad rust. The trick when welding thin sheet for rust repair is to stitch it in with lots of little welds rather than one big one, as that will create a lot of heat and blow through the workpiece.
So I just thought I'd take a minute to show you a couple of basic tools that are good to have if you're keen to give something like this a go yourself at home, because you don't actually need a lot to have a crack. I've got a couple of basic ones here. First one is a pick hammer. Now the reason this is good is because it's got lots of different faces on it, so you can use it for different things. Like for example, the front face here is nice and flat, so it's real good for getting in nice even contact with the panel when you're doing a bit of panel beating. This is just a sanding pad. Super simple, this is just from a local auto parts store. Super straightforward, gives you a nice flat surface. And then over here, this is a dolly. The reason this one's so good is because it's essentially a universal dolly. It's got lots of different surfaces on it for lots of different dents. So you've got a nice flat surface here, but it's also a little bit curved on the edges. Up here, you got a bit more of a curve. It's also quite weighty, so you could even use it for bashing out a few dents as well. So that's pretty much all you need. You don't need a lot to give panel beating a go yourself at home. I'm not a panel beater by any means, and I'm pretty keen to give this a crack, and hopefully I won't be putting any more dents in the pony, especially after how much work we've put into it. Righto, let's hook in.
Thankfully, this front guard isn't too bad, and I reckon it's looking pretty good. For some of the more gnarly stuff though, well, I'll leave that to the professionals.
So that's looking pretty good there. There's another little dent up here, but I'll show you another little sneaky trick. What you can do with this guard is flip him around. And now I can put the dolly on the outside face of the guard and actually use the pick side and just give a little. And look at that, it's almost gone. That's actually sick. I didn't even put a lot of, like, I wasn't smacking the heck out of it with the pick either. I was just giving it some nice taps with the dolly to keep the weight on the other side. You can hardly even tell. All right, so now the dents are knocked out. The next thing that I'm gonna do is actually sandblast the panel. Now, again, this is just an inexpensive kit. This is just from the local auto parts store and a big bucket of grit. And we're just gonna go over here, particularly where the rust is pitted into the metal. You can see here it's a little bit worse, and you don't want to grind that too far because you can actually weaken the steel a fair bit. So now we're just going to use a sandblaster to get rid of that, and then we'll probably give it a coat of Brunox just to protect that bare steel so that rust can't get back through. And it'll look $1,000,000. Handy tip, if you are going to do this yourself at home, do it outside because you'll get sand everywhere. So with a lot of the panels on the Pony, obviously we've removed some of the doors and the boys have already got stuck into the repairs on the tub, but some of the panels we're replacing and some of them we're just going to be pulling the dents out and using body filler to cover up, for example, these scratches from rocks. I think this is when I put it on its side the second time. Whoa! A little bit more damage. Can't remember. Anyway. A real common thing when it comes to body filler is a lot of people think that you need to sand it back to bare metal before you put the body filler on. And the reason for that is back in the day, motor vehicles were painted with what was called acrylic lacquer, which when the body filler needs heat to cure, and on acrylic lacquer it wouldn't bond, so then everything would heat up and basically the bog would just fall off. So then people would think, oh, I've got to sand the panel back to bare metal to get it to bond. But modern cars are coming out with 2-pack paint and you don't need to do that. And in many cases, you can actually end up doing more harm to the panel itself if you do sand it back to bare metal. And the reason for that is, as soon as you take that paint off, it's gonna start to rust pretty much straight away. So a handy tip to tell is if you get a little bit of paint thinners on a rag and just give the panel a little bit of a wipe. This is to check on the paint it is. If it doesn't come off like that, it means that it's essentially 2-pack paint and it's good to go. So with body filler on here, it won't need to be sanded back to bare metal, and it means that the rest of the panel will be protected and we can just tidy it up, give it a light sand, and then body filler over the top.
We're using this Dolphin Premium Body Filler to fill in the imperfections on the panels, and this Fibril Light fiberglass filler to fix up the body. The goal when mixing filler is to not have any air bubbles or pinholes in the mix, as it's more likely that they'll show up when you apply the body filler onto the panel, and you won't get a nice smooth surface to sand back and coat over. Damien doesn't think I'm much chop at mixing bogs, so he's showing me how the pros do it.
For this we need the real spatula, so use it that side up. Take that.
Thanks.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it that way.
Like
Yeah,
down in one,
yeah.
can I go back or just down in one?
Yeah, just down.
Whoop. This is what happens when you have a whole bunch of qualified panel beaters watching you do bog on a dent you
I
made.
can't watch anymore. Get out of my way before it goes off.
Once you mix up the body filler, it's not going to last forever, so you need to use it before it hardens.
So you got to be quick, he says.
Gotta be quick. It's gonna go off.
So this would be good practice for when I do it on a car where I actually care about the panels a lot more. I will now after this.
There you go.
Thank you.
Go for it.
When you apply it to the panel, you want to ensure you're applying it nice and evenly and smoothly. Watch out for any pinholes, and you don't want to cake too much on because it just means you're going to have to sand more off. The trick is to get the panel nice and even, but these high spots in between where I've run the spatula aren't the worst thing in the world because I'm going to sand them off. What I'm focusing on here is making sure I'm filling in all the imperfections and getting a nice, smooth, flat, even surface that I can work the panel with an air sander once the bog's hardened.
So this stuff here is called guide coat, and basically you spray it on so you can track where you've run. And because I, well, did a good job of bogging the door, this will just give me a good indication of where I've sanded back the bog and get it nice and smooth and try and get all the dents out, eh? He has faith in me, you can tell.
The guide coat is perfect for showing you any high and low spots on the panel, as you'll be able to sand off the high ones and you'll still have guide coat left on the areas that need a bit of attention. We're making awesome progress. We've just about finished sanding the body and I'm getting super excited. We don't need to go back to bare metal here, just enough to give it a scuff to allow the Raptor to bond properly. Any areas that had some surface rust, we are sanding it back to bare metal and coating with Brunox. This will kill any rust left over in the panel and keep the metal protected.
You can see here, here's the original numbers from the first Bush Mechanic Challenge I did with Sean. And you can vaguely see who owes who some beers. I think Sean still owes me a few more. Might have to put this back on when I'm done. That's a new era for the pony. Try now. The battery terminal broke, so I had to hold it there so I could start it. I like it without the canopy. Looks good. So obviously you might be sitting there thinking that we've taken the doors off, this is a pretty big job, but it's not that daunting. It just depends on how thorough you want to be when you're doing the Raptor coat. Because we're changing the color a fair bit, going from a white to a darker color, it'll be quite obvious. That's why we've removed the doors, but you don't have to do this if you're giving it a go yourself in your shed at home. But if you want to be thorough like we do, it's not that hard to remove the doors, strip everything, and get into those little nitty-gritty parts. Devil's in the detail, I reckon. Well, massive day on the tools, but we've got a heap more to do. I think that's pretty good for the first day. Tomorrow, we'll get some primer on her, and then it's closer to Raptor time. See you then. Well, it's day 2 and we've got heaps of work to do. We've got to mask everything up. We've got to get some primer on the doors and the inside of the door jambs, and we've also got to prep the bar work. Oh, there's a lot on, let's do it.
So now the vehicle's sanded, we're going to give it a bit of a clean with some water-based degreaser before we mask it up and prep it for primer. With all paint, but particularly with Raptor, the key to getting a long-lasting finish is in the prep work.
So a handy tip, if you are going to the effort of taking the doors off and you want to paint inside the doors here, you can see that where we've masked just runs along where the door trim will clip back into, which means that we can paint along the door and then the door trim will cover where the paint ends, so you won't see it, and then from the outside the paint will go all the way behind the door trim and it'll look nice. Just some little extra thing. It means you also don't need to spend heaps of time masking on a real defined line that you're going to see anyway. If you just do it behind the door trim, it'll save you a little bit of time, because masking takes a fair while. So while Warren's mixing up the primer, I'm just going to go over a couple of the areas that we've sanded back to bare metal, give it a quick hit with some Brunox. This is a primer as well, so you can Raptor over the top of it. We'll probably still put some primer over it, but it's good to know that if you're just using this to protect some panels, you can then apply the Raptor over the top of this and it'll be sweet.
We're using a normal spray gun to apply the primer, and it's simply a case of pouring it into a mixing cup, giving it a stir around, and then pouring it straight into the gun. We're not thinning the primer down, we're just applying it straight on.
Alright, so we're just getting things ready to Raptor the vehicle, and I thought I'd show you the colour we've decided on. So we've gone for an olive drab colour, a bit of a olive green. And the reason for that is, well, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, we've painted a few vehicles in silver with Raptor now, like Sean Sooty, so I thought it'd be cool to do something different. I thought about sandy taupe, but to match the canopy, but that's quite a common colour now, and it's not a 79, so I thought I'd do something a bit different. And the third reason I chose this colour is I'm a big fan of military history, and this colour is actually very similar to the colour that the US Army painted the M4 Sherman tank, which in my opinion was one of the best tanks of the Second World War because it had good armour and it had... Wait, where are you going? Alright, so the insides of the doors and stuff are all Raptored, and I reckon that colour is coming up real nice. So now we're going to put the doors back on, and then we can essentially do a closed door respray. Whoa, who masked up this side? Got the lines pretty nice.
The doors are back on and we can finally get into spraying the body. We're giving it a good couple of coats in primer, but we're letting it set before we apply the next one. Tell you what, even with just a coat of primer, she's starting to look pretty slick. Righto, so it's time to give the big girl a Raptor coat. If you're using the Very nozzle gun like I am, it's good to test it on some cardboard first to dial in the gun for the texture you want.
Alright, so here's what we're looking at. These three, this one at the top here was with the pressure coming out of the compressor too low. And you can see here it's sprayed everywhere. It almost just kind of goes out of the gun. It's not what you want. This second one here was the pressure too high, and you can see it's even started to run here. Even though the texture isn't too bad, you can see there's just so much Raptor coming out of the gun. It's almost a bit too hard to control. And with this one here too as well, an important thing to consider, if your pressure's too high, you're gonna be churning through Raptor much faster because it's coming out so much faster out of the gun, you'll go through it a lot quicker. And then down here is with the pressure dialed in nicely, and then we've also fine-tuned the gun. So this is pretty much the texture that we're gonna be applying on the pony. And you can see here, it just looks a little bit more even though you've got a bit of overspray here compared to up here with the pressure too low. There's a big difference between the two. These two probably look a bit similar, but this will be much thicker because of how much Raptor came out of the gun just with one pass. So down here is about what you want. Now again, with this gun, the Very nozzle one, you can fine tune the texture if you want it a bit coarser or a bit finer like this. So, it's time to paint the pony.
We've got two tintable kits here, about 8 litres, but we won't be using that much to coat the vehicle. We should have a couple of litres spare from these kits for if I ever need to do any touch-ups. You know, because those panels are going to stay straight for the rest of her time.
Whoa!
You want to make sure when you're using a spray gun you hold it parallel to the job as much as possible and give it a nice even coat. Also, when running the gun, go a bit past the workpiece before you come back. That just ensures it finishes off nicely before your next coat. Remember, lots of lighter coats is better than one thick coat. Particularly with Raptor, you want it thicker in high traffic areas like doors where you're more likely to get scratches.
Well, I'll tell you what, I reckon that is looking sick. We're gonna let this cure overnight, and then tomorrow we can hook back in with the reassembly, put the bar work back on. The pony's back, almost. Oh, that's looking sick. We've got a huge day today. We've got to start putting everything back on, bar work, guards. We've got to unmask it first, get it out in the sun, I reckon, to dry a little bit more. Oh, this is sick, let's do it.
This has been an awesome couple of days and we're getting really close to having her back together. The door trims are going back in as well as the old Shock Customs canopy.
While we're reassembling the pony, just thought I'd do a cheeky little upgrade. So this is a set of mirrors off a 60 series Land Cruiser and they bolt straight up to Hilux doors. I'm gonna chuck these on, I'll actually be able to see behind me. I think they'll look pretty cool. Now the term Super Tourer gets thrown around a lot, but chuck some 60 series mirrors on. Look at that. It's a truck now, a Mack truck. The F100.
The last piece of the pony puzzle is the bar work, and with that fresh coat of Raptor, it's looking mint.
How unreal does this look? I reckon this colour really suits the old Luxie.
We've repaired some panels, fixed the rust and given it a Raptor coat. This whole job took us about 3 days to prep and Raptor coat, but we also needed a few days worth to get all the bodywork done. But if you didn't need to do that, you could easily tackle a job like this over the weekend in your shed at home with some mates. We used about 5 litres of Raptor to coat the entire vehicle and about 3 litres on the bar work, because remember, when you're using Raptor on bar work, because you're painting tube, you'll use a bit more. So all in all, we used about 8 litres of Raptor, 5 for the body and 3 for the bar work. So 8 litres of Raptor with the Very gun cost us around $800, and the primer another $250. Add in the cost of the colour paint, body filler, roughly around $80 each, and the new panels, around $400, it comes to just under $1,700. If you were going to do this at home, you probably wouldn't need to buy new panels or repair as much as we needed to on the pony. So the price would obviously vary, but keep in mind if you don't have the tools, you'll have to factor this in too.
Well, now that the mighty pony is looking as tough as nails and Doesn't have a single dent in the whole vehicle. It's time to get her home so I can crack on with the mechanical repairs, and then gonna be time to get her out bush. I tell you what though, I might be a little bit more scared to put any marks on those panels, but make sure you keep an eye out for that. So I reckon the pony and I have got some exploring to do. Catch you next time.